tragedy, tragic situations, almonois, almons, yisoinim, elderly people, young people dying in the most tragic way over the past few months. We had a very difficult time. The shaila is, what should our reaction be? Or as Rav Shlomo Gottesman asked me to discuss, the way forward. What are we supposed to do now? Rashi brings down the very first Rashi in Shlach. B'shem the Medrash says Rashi, Lomo nismecha parshas meraglim the parshas Miriam. Why is the parsha of the meraglim juxtaposed next to the parsha of Miriam Hanaviyah that she spoke Lashon Hara? The fisha lokcha al iske dibur, that Miriam, she was loka because she spoke Lashon Hara on her brother. U'rishoim halolu ra'u, they saw these Rishoim, the meraglim, v'lo lokchu musa, and they did not learn from Miriam's iniquity, from her aveda, that they should understand the severity of speaking Lashon Hara. Now, Rashi is telling us a fantastic chidush. If the truth be told, I always thought that the chet of the meraglim, the severity of the aveda of the meraglim was that they said Lashon Hara on Eretz Yisrael. But according to Rashi, that's not the pshat. The severity, the reason why the Torah treated the Lashon Hara of the meraglim so severely is because they did not learn Musa. They did not look at the past, immediate past event and learn from it and correct their ways. Again, I repeat to you the Lashon of Rashi, Lama nismecha parshas meraglim and parshas Miriam. The fisha loksa al iske dibu shedibra v'acheha urshom alolu ra'u, they saw, they witnessed what Miriam, that the whole nation had to stay an extra amount of time in the midbar before they moved forward because she was excommunicated, she had tzaras. And they refused to learn from the events of Miriam, moving forward, how they should act or react to certain circumstances. This is the Tviyah Atzuma. This is the tremendous taina that Borei Olam has to the meraglim. Not as much as they said Lashon Hara, but the fact that they chose to turn a blind eye to immediate past events. The event of Miriam's punishment because of the Lashon Hara that she spoke. The Balei Musa bring down a pasuk in Mishlei. Harzek b'musar al teiraf noitzra kihi chayecho, which tells us that we are to hold on to Musar and do not let it go, because Musar is our lifeline. There's another medrash. Shteit medrash azoi says in the medrash, Moshe le'echad mushloch l'toich hamayim. An individual is thrust into the water, into the ocean, into the vast sea. Hoishit ha'kavrinet es ha'chevel. The captain of the ship thrust him a lifeline, a rope. Catch this rope, and do not leave it alone. Because you should know, if you will leave this rope alone, you will not have any life. If you will perform my commandments, says in the Torah, "Atem hadvekim b'Hashem Elokeichem, chayim kulchem hayom," shall you live. But then the Medrash continues and says, "V'chein hu omer, havzek b'musar al teiraf ki hi chayecha," meaning that if you want to be a atem hadvekim dikayid, if you want to be b'Hashem Elokeichem, chayim kulchem dikayid, says the Medrash, there's only one method that can be used, and that is Havzek b'musar al teiraf ki chayecha. Musar, according to the Medrash, is the lifeline of the Jew. That is the bridge. That is the conduit which brings him to the Atem Hadveikim Hashem Elokeichem Chayim Kulchem Hayoim. She'im tanichehu ein lecho chayim. If you will leave that rope, which is the rope which brings you to the Atem Hadveikim Hashem Chayim Kulchem Hayoim, you will never get there. The Vilna Gaon writes in Mishlei, on that posuk, he says, Masha Odom Chai, that which a person is alive, is Kedei Lishbor Mashalei Shovar Adheina Oisa Hamida. The Imlo is Chazek Lomaloi Chayim. A person is alive, living in order to build upon the past and see what he did wrong and correct his ways. That is the tachlis of a yid in this world. It is far from me, as we would say, above my pay scale to tell people what they did wrong. But one thing I may say, if by the Olam brought such a calamitous calamitous amount of events upon our people over the last 3 months, and still there are many, many stories which are still untold, and many people still are on ventilators in hospitals, and the tragedies are still ongoing. It's because Bari Olam wants us to learn and from these events and say, correct your ways. Learn Musa, and by learning Musa, you will be given that lifeline which will teach you how to properly be Mekayim, the Atemat Veikim, Hashem Alekeichem, Chaim Kulchem Ayoim. Just to show you the importance of Limud HaMusa, it is not the optional, it is the imperative. Says Rav Elya Lapian, and I quote, Etzli hakvius hayoimis lelimud hamusa. By me to learn Musar every day, hu bebchinas pikuach nefesh. That with Musar I am alive. Without Musar I am in a matziv of pikuach nefesh mamish, which means I can chas v'sholem end up on the wrong side of where I should be for eternity, for always, for netzach. Reb Doiv Yafla, the Mashgiach in Kfar Hasidim, Zechariah Levrocha, said he remembers how Rav Elya Lapian would read the Noitzer Ki Chayecha V'Shad Ko'achi. He would yell like a lion, give out, Ki Chayecha. This is your life. Musar is our life. We'll see in a minute what Rabbi Yisrael Salanta was mechadish. If it's our life, it was our life before Rabbi Yisrael Salanta. But this is what it says over here. And therefore, when we get the parshiyos, these parshiyos of Kairach, and we'll see later on the Meraglim. So says Rav Elya Lapian, he says, Nu ich frag euch, steht nicht da mit auf deiner Musse? I ask you, cannot we deduce from these parshiyos the importance of learning Musa? We will see, come back to that also in a few moments. Rev Gershon Edelstein, Shlita, from Ponyvish, says he remembers going into the Briskerov many times, or Velvel Brisker, Rechoif Press in Yerushalayim. And there was always a Mesilas Yesharim on the table of the Briskerov. And the Briskerov told him, I learn a parak of Mesilas Yesharim every single day. You would have thought that the Briskerov, the individual with the Reina Hashkofa, with the most purest of Hashkofa Sachayim and Hashkofa Sateicha, would not need these, quote unquote, enhancements. But the Briskerov learned Musar every single day, and he told him, Gershon, and what do I do when I finish learning the Mesilas Yesharim? I start from the beginning. I go back to the beginning of the Mesilas Yesharim. The Pele Yoyitz writes, a Friedike, a Kadmoin, he writes that what it says in the Torah, in Chazal, in the Gemara Masech the Kedushin, that Torah is Tavlin b'fnei ha'yetzer hara, be'ikir, the Kavona is on the Chelik HaMusar Shebetayah. It's be'ikir, the Chelik of Musar, that if a person learns Musar, it is a Tavlin, it is a protection against the yetzer hara. Vorim nifloim adam yoyim. The Balei Musar write that Sefer Bamidbar, Rechlal, is the Sefer HaMusar. There are very few, relatively speaking, mitzvahs aseh, mitzvahs lo aseh, compared to other Chomoshim. Be'ikir Sefer Bamidbar is a Sefer Musar. Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz writes that a person should have two sedorim in Musar. One seder where he addresses his shortcomings, his spiritual shortcomings. This is what Rabbi Yisrael is Mechadesh. And another seder where that individual will learn up other inyanim and to get the diyos concerning chayvos hamusa, chayvos halavavos. So when we learn these parshiyos, the parsha of the Meraglim, and afterwards we learn the parsha of Kairach, and then we introduced the Bilam. Bilam was an individual who shared the same revelations and same level of revelations that Moshe Rabbeinu possessed. And yet, look where he ended up. We read the parsha of Zimri ben Salu, We read the parsha of Balak with all those personalities and their character flaws. The Rav Chatzky used to say they given anokim, they were giants. Große Menschen, they were big people. So what happened? Kulam noflu, says Rav Chatzky Levenstein, because shalaylam de musa. You heard? Because of midos voice. Kulam istavu machmas midos. They had kidna and they had taiva and they had kavod. Hakol mepnei shachol v'loy lokhu musa. All of those, not only Parshas Meraglim, but all of them, they saw what happened in the previous Parshas, and they did not learn Musa. So Rabbi said, we see that La'osid Lavoi, it's very possible, not very possible, Vadai, there will be a taina leveled against us in case we do not fulfill this very important piece of instruction that we're being given, that individuals should look at what's going on, then learn Musa and try to then say, Bari Olam vil epis from me. Bari Olam wants something from me. These events, these most tragic and unsurpassed events, don't come. They are unprecedented events. They should create in us an unprecedented rush to the Musa Shchaink in the Beis Medrash and take out Sifrei Musa and become introspective and see what does Bari Olam want from me. That is the Tzav Hashor. The Ramchal writes, Chayv ala Odom sheyamoid b'chol yom, this is the Ramchal, not your Rosh Hashiva or your Mashgiach Nishiva around the corner. The Ramchal sheyamoid Odom b'chol yom lepochos sho achas ponui mishar kol hamachshavos lachshoy v'rak ala inyan hazeh she'amarti. A person should meditate every single day and think, what does Bari Olam want from me? V'yivakesh b'levovoi, and go into your heart. Ma osu harishonim. The Rishonim, the Avois HaOlam, Shekach Choshak Hashem Behem. Why did Bari Olam love the Avois HaOlam? Does not mean from Yisrael B'Yankiv Davkir. Why did Bari Olam like the Friedrich Adairis, the previous generations, and why not our generation? And a riot to that is the past events for the last 3 months. Possibly because we are not fulfilling our responsibility. What did Bari Olam want from them? Shmiras Einayim. I saw a Mordechai Meiser, Rav Doiv Tzvi Karellenstein. His wife was tragically hit by a car, and she was. The doctor said her prognosis for living is 0. She's going to live another 24 to 36 hours, and that was it. And in the meantime, while she was in the hospital, he was sitting next to her bed, and the nurse sent the message she wants to speak to the husband. And Tzvi Doiv said to his brother-in-law, "Do me a favor, you go speak to the lady nurse." And whereupon his brother-in-law says to Tzvi Doiv, I'm a Yid like you're a Yid, and you're a Yid like I'm a Yid. If you feel it's not proper to speak to a Nekeva, to a lady, then why should I speak to her? He says, let me tell you, Al Pi Halacha, it's mutter. 100% it's mutter. But I want you to know that for 29 years, I'm working on myself and my Shmiras Einayim. 29 years. I'm sure that my wife would not want me to compromise on working with those in Yanim now when she's about to enter the Olam HaEmes. Do me that favor. Rav Nosson Wachfeugel once remarked to Barabin and said as follows, I know, he said about himself, that there are others who are much more worthy of becoming the Mashgiach of Beis Medrash Gavoya and Lakewood. They are bigger than me, perhaps more oiskaber than me, more learned than me, more knowledgeable than myself, and perhaps even bigger Yerei Elokim than myself. So with what schus did I have that the Rosh Hashiva Rav Aaron Kotler decided to pick me as a mashgiach? I can only think of one schus that I have. That schus is that I'm very nizer in Shmiras Einayim. And because of that, Bari Olam decided to give me the siyata d'shmai to become the mashgiach in Lakewood. I heard, I cannot verify it, but I heard from 2 different people that the biggest Maggid Shir in the last 100 years, perhaps or more, Rav Osher Arayeli in the Mir. It's L'mayim Derech HaTeva, 750, 100, 1,000 listening to his shir on a daily basis. But very few people know that Rav Osher was extremely makbid Shmiras Einayim. He would take a taxi when he could have taken a bus, and a taxi was expensive, and he received the same salary as other Rashi Chaburas in the Mir, which was nothing to write home about. Aval Pi Chen, he was Moshe Nefesh or his Shmiras Einayim, and that gave him possibly this schus, me'al kol schusum, of being perhaps the biggest Ma'aretz Torah in our generation. Now, this is the Ramchal. HaRav Shach once commented as follows: perhaps a person is doing a chet that is not so discernible to the outside world, perhaps not at all recognizable to the outside world, but to himself, he knows his own shortcoming. The Gemara Masechta, the David brings down, Alma of the Haaretz. Why did we lose Eretz Yisrael? Davazeh shalu lechachomim v'lo yodu. Davazeh shalu leviim and heim gamkein lo yodu. Davazeh shalu lemalachei ashores, and they also didn't know why we were deserved of such a punishment of the Haaretz, Avedas Haaretz. Ad Shema Kodesh Baruch Hu answered, Shlei Baruch Hu B'Torah Tchila. I'm not going to go into the severity of not making a bracha, but however, I want to bring out a point. If Shach says as follows, he asks, if this Aveda was such a subtle Aveda, such a small Aveda, that the Chachamim did not understand it to be a big Aveda, the Nevi'im did not understand it to be a big Aveda, the Malach HaSharis had no appreciation of it for being a big Aveda. So what tiny could there be against a Poshet Yid who was like Baruch B'Torah Tchila that make a bracha on Birchas HaTorah before he started the Torah? Is he supposed to have a greater appreciation than Malachi HaSharis or Nevi'im and Chachamim? Says Rav Shach, dacht sich mir, als der Wend von mein Zimmer hat sich geträßelt, wenn ich dem Heimat gewinnt auf dem Teretz. I think that the walls of my room started to shake when I thought of the Teretz. And the Teretz is, you have to say that a person, every one of us has a greater understanding of our own unique and particular shortcomings than even the Chachamim, the Nevi'im, and Malachi HaSharis. And I found that Chaim Shulevitz in this parsha, Mipi HaShmuah, someone told me, a Mordi Gavor, it says that Gabi Miriam, Vayishma Hashem, the Lashon Hara, that she said on Moshe Rabbeinu. It says to Chaim Shulevitz, it was Yishma Hashem Daiko. Nobody heard the Lashon Hara. It was only by the Olam who heard her whispering to herself. And you'd have thought that that's not Lashon Hara. But for Miriam's Madrege, that is a Lashon Hara. And such a subtle Aveda, Miriam knew she did something wrong, whereas others would never have known that she did something wrong. We are a greater maven on our lives than even the Malachi HaSharis. And every one of us, through introspection, through Limud HaMusar, taking Svogim that can bring the Orchas Tzadikim and all the Sifrei Musar, and the Shari Tshuva can show us perhaps a little bit of where we can straighten out our lives, and we'll go once again in the path of the straight and narrow. It's brought down in the Kelem, the Altaf in Kelem brings down that Loi Lokchu Musir, Eich Nivnis Parsha Shlach. How do you have the whole Parsha Shlach? Eich Nivne Churban Adayros. How do we have now the Tisha B'Av? Hein Bochu B'Chia Shel Chinam. Hashem said, I'll give them a B'Chia that won't be for Chinam. The Churban Beis HaMikdash, Eich Nivne. From where it comes, where does it come from? Churban Beis HaMikdash. Kipshutoi Shailoi Lokchu Musir. They did not take a Musa Sefer after the tragic events and say, how can I correct my ways? And perhaps, in the yeshivas we talk about, is Limud HaMusar a minig? Is it a Rabbanon? Is it a Deraisa? If it is a Deraisa, where is the Makor? Says Rav Eli Lapiyan in a different essay, perhaps Sefer Bamidbar can serve as one great source for this Nakuda of that an individual, a Yid, is B'chuyev to learn Musa. This is the Rav Eli Lapiyan saying that it is perhaps our understanding from learning these parshiyos that we should be involved in Musa. Musa is not only for the fellows sitting and learning 3 Sidorim a day, and the Gabbai gives a patch on the beam and says, Musa. Musa is for every balabos, every mechanich, every individual, like Rav Eli Lapiyan said, Atov was ichlemish kemusa, de'er Musa is bikoach nefesh mamish, ad kedei kach. The Chavetz Chaim writes as follows in a different essay. He says, Kivin shu murkov mi nefesh sichlis u mi nefesh bahamis. An individual is made up of two parts, part soul, part soil, part timely, part timeless, part nefesh, and part neshama. He says, if we will chas v'sholem, even for a few brief moments, disregard or ignore the Chelik HaNeshama in lieu of and in favor of our Chelik HaGuf. Im Odom Masiach Daitoi Mi'at. If a person will be Masiach Das, will be lightheaded, and for a few moments not think of his Ma Chayvosoi Boi Lomoi. What is my chiyuv in this world? I think for a few moments, someone in my neighborhood who worked all his life to put together every dollar he could. He died, he had $10 million in cash investments, in investment houses, not in real estate, in investment houses, cash. And he was so proud of it. Within 5 minutes, he was gone. He received a problem because of the corona, and within 5 minutes, he was gone. What happened to all of his dreams? What happened to all that money that he worked all his life for? It went to other people. Think of the futility of working all our lives just to make that buck, and then what? And then what? Shmuel Berman, the Chrein Vrocha, Marenu Tifartenu, unsere Greise Rebbe, the Mir Rosh Hashiva, used to say, Kederach HaDarshonim, you know, you go buy a toy in the store for your child, or for your, my case, my Einiklach, and it says on the box, ages 2 to 4, ages 5 to 10, ages 10 to 15. Says Shmuel Birnbaum, I want to propose that they should write on money also ages perhaps 12, 13 until 95, 100, and so on and so forth. It's als ein grosser Spielach. It's all one toy. In the scheme of life, in the scheme of what we are mechuyev to do and accomplish in this world, if we think about it, to waste our lives on trying to build up that which we really do not need for the sustenance of ourselves and our mishpacha is ludicrous. The Chatzkel Abramsky writes as follows. We're saying to the son of Toikev, Mi yichye, mi yomus, mi be'esh, mi b'mayim, and you know, we're afraid who's going to live and who's going to die. And Rav Chatzkel Abramsky said he passed by the edge of Snoshim and he heard the way the ladies were crying, mi be'esh, mi b'mayim, etc., etc. Says Chatzkel Abramsky, Abramsky veint euch. Abramsky cries also. Where does he cry? He cries when he says, "Belachmoi tovi lachmoi." Sorry. He meant to say, with his days, with his toil, he brings his lechem, which means, "Benafshoi tovi lachmoi." With his soul does he bring his lechem, which means how much nafshi is, how much soul do I give away? How many blad gemara am I giving away to make that extra dollar? Talking about now the extra dollar. To go on that extra vacation. To spend time extra, stop schmoozing where nothing is to be gained. All this we can hear better with more clarity and more of a clarification if we take ourselves and learn Sifrei Musa. So this is the Chavetz Chaim, a Murdik Chavetz Chaim, that he says that if we do not watch and nurture our soul, then after a few moments, it's our guf takes over, and then the rest is chas v'sholom, all downhill. And the Chavetz Chaim ends up in saying, Musa is chelik chochmas ha-teire, shemelvad keitza lahachnis es neshama leguf. Shemelame keitza lahachnis and neshama leguf. Our job is to bring our chelik ha-neshama into our guf. They call the Chevre Kedisha. Chevre Kedisha. Why is it called Chevre Kedisha? So we say because they are being oisik with an individual who is Kadosh. Some Sefer writes in a place that it really has a very, very profound meaning. Our hope is, our most fervent of hopes is that when the time comes for our neshamas to depart, our bodies, our guf, that there should be this total synchronization between and synthesis between body and soul, that the soul was able to be mekadosh every part of our soul, of our body, of our chelik of soil. That's why I call Chevre Kedisha, that they are oisik in that which we hope was so affected by the chelik haneshama that now even the chelik haguf became kodesh. There's also Salanta. Say the Bali Musa, his chiddush was to learn the Hislavus, to learn Musa Hislavus. Rabbi Yisrael Salanta says, I have to learn the Hislavus. And I'm not ashamed. I remember once Rabbi Lapian taught us and showed us in Krasid, American boys went to visit Rabbi Lapian. And one of the fellows asked him, Rebbe, we heard from HaRav there was a nigun of Musa. When they learned Musa in the yeshivas, could you perhaps sing for us the nigun? And Vayab Yana had no problem singing the nigun. Ay, 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 ay. It's a nigun which breaks the heart. That's Rabbi Yisrael's Achidus. That you should learn Musa b'spilus hanefesh, b'leiv nochoim, b'kol otsev, b'sasayim dolkim. Ay, 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 ay. That was part of the Messiah. So why should I be ashamed to sing you that nigun? That's part of the Messiah, the yeshivas of Lithuania, that they taught the Bali Musa, of Abba Musa, of Yisrael, was Moshe this, my Rosh of the Klal Yisrael. Choshev Moichav Rabbi Yisai. Ravon Kotler once said, in case somebody thinks that by learning Musa, it'll make him sad, it'll put him to a massive of atzvus, of depression. He says there's nothing further from the truth. Says Ravon Kotler, and I quote, Kol redifos hatainugim. If a person in this world runs and tries to attain the better things of life, the b'chinas gashmi in the material world, he thinks by doing so it'll make him a happy individual. But you should know, but the truth is, that a person should know that which brings a person to depression is thinking he's here forever. He thinks that what I make and I have is mine, will always be mine, and there's no greater source for depression. Put yourself into spiritual pursuits, and you'll be a happy person. Allow me to end with the following. Chaim Vital once asked his grace Rebbe, the Arizal, how can I expect, or we expect, that our acts should be able to bring Mashiach Tzidkenu? We are common compared to the previous generations. And if their acts was not sufficient to bring Mashiach, why should our acts be any better? If anything, they're a lot worse. Says Arizal with his famous clarion statement that should stay with us for all times. Says Rev Arizal says, Maise Kotten Shalonu, Choshev Yosef and Maise Godel Shalahem. We are living in a generation where there's so many pollutants, spiritual pollutants out there, right? In the Wi-Fi zones, so many spiritual pollutants that if a person is Zaychid Bisman Hazeh to be involved in spiritual pursuits, Maise Kotten Shaloi is more choshev than Maise Godel Shalahem. Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz writes, remember the Chassam Sofer says, it's an echo of what the Chassam Sofer says also. Maisim Shalonu, Rabbi Yerucham writes, are more choshev, this is what the Chassam Sofer says, this chaylik, than Yamaroyim and Tanoyim. Rabbi Yerucham says, a Talmud who learns in Yeshiva because of the nisyonis they go through, I'm not ashamed to say, Rabbi Yerucham says, and Lithuanians will not want for exaggeration, are more choshev than even Rabbi Kvege. How are we supposed to understand that? Rabbi Yerucham writes this beforish in the beginning of his Das Torah Chelik Devarim, because Rabbi Yerucham was very cognizant, and by the way, Rabbi Yerucham said this before the .com era. He said it in Lithuania, in the Mir, in the 1920s, 1930s, where my father Hashem told me that the men walked on one side of the street and the ladies walked on the other side. And if a man with Hashem walked on the same side as the ladies, they would call it an Isa Yichud, Ad Kedei Kach. And in that generation, Rabbi Yerucham says of Ben Teich, who sits and learns Teich, his acts, his Limat Teich, perhaps it surpasses even that of Rikvege. So Choshev Moirav Rabbi Yisai, we have our mission. Our mission is to take Yiddishkeit very seriously, and let's get off the mitzvahs anoshim with the mother bandwagon by that on autopilot. Our Yiddishkeit has been too long on autopilot. It has been a rote religion. We don't think into our davening. We don't think into what it means. Shmiras Einayim. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz writes that he used to go to Tel Aviv and say a shir once a week. And one time he says, I saw something that you're not allowed to see. And it took away 50 years of my musa. I said, it's not kedai. I'm never going again to Tel Aviv. Ad kedei kach. So Rabbi, we have to appreciate and understand what these Avedas, what kind of a hezek, what kind of a mazik, what kind of destruction, destructive force these Averis are. Averis of Lashon Hara, Averis of Kina and Taiva and Kavod. Gedalia Eisman from Kol Torah was once in the base medrash, and he was looking for something. So Bocha said, Kvod HaRav Mashgiach, perhaps I can help you find that what you're looking for. He says, no, you won't be able to help me find what I need. He says, what do you mean? I can help. Mashgiach should tell me. So the Mashgiach saw an opening to teach his Bocha a lesson. He said, I'll tell you the truth. I'm looking for a Ben Olam Hazeh. So the Bocha asks the Mashgiach, Kvod HaRav, Mashgiachim usually look for Bnei Olam Haba, not Bnei Olam Hazeh. Says the Mashgiach, how do you not understand? The Mishnah tells us, Ki Kina v'Taiva v'Kavod moitzim ha'odam min ha'olam. Kina, jealousy, Taiva, the lust to have Taivas, the material desires of this world, and Kavod. Kavod is something which is a ruchnis dika, a metaphysical concept, but it never dies. It's also a Taiva. These things take a person out of this world that he cannot function properly because he's so involved and obsessed with that little bit of Taiva or Kavod or Kina, that he's not part of this world. He cannot function properly in this world. Says the Mashgiach, I am looking for something, for somebody who is still in this world. In fact, there's a mice of the Alta of Slabotke. The Alta of Slabotke was talking to somebody, Yitzchak Hutner was sitting with him. And afterwards they left, and Rav Hutner comes into the Alta the next day and says, that fellow who was here yesterday, the Chevre Kadisha came and took him away. So Hutner asked, what do you mean? I didn't hear he was nifta. He was a young fellow. He wasn't sick. He says, don't you understand? I saw yesterday he was only interested in one thing, receiving covered from me. If so, the Chevre Kadisha came and took him away from Olam Hazeh, meaning that he is now encumbered. He does not have the mile of being able to function properly in this world, which will bring him eventually to the next world. May we all be Zeichen, Rabbi said. Let's in unison get back to the old time Yiddishkeit, the old time religion, where every Erlich Yid took a Reishis Chochmah, took a Chayvus Halvavos, took an Orchas Tzadikim, took a Mesilas Yisharim, took a Shalei Tshuva, especially after these events. Oy v'avoy will by the Olam have kindness on us. If we do not correct our ways by the beginning, and the way we begin this is by taking Sifrei Musar and learning about our shortcomings, and then we will see things that we were never cognizant of. We will be illumined, we will be educated, we will be guided, we will be instructed on how we are to correct our ways. I want to give Ayesha Koyach to Israel for being there all these months, every single day, being mechazik us, every one of us. You are a tremendous source of chizuk for myself and my kehillah. Because we give the gaboyim of Agudas Yisrael the siyata d'shmaya that they should have arichas yom shalom tovim, the schus and grois nachas of what they've done for Klal Yisrael. They took the bull by the horns immediately when they were needed. And how much of a chizuk, of a source of chizuk were they in these most difficult times? Chazak ve'emotz, zozei chazak v'korov, tziyishuis v'nechomis and bias